Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burgess-Watson, and coming up on the show, we'll be getting the very latest on the hostilities earlier in the week between Israel and the Syrian leadership. We'll be finding out if the ceasefire in Syria with the Druze community is holding. Plus, we'll bring you all the latest top stories of the week from the United States. Hello and thanks for joining us. We begin our programme with the latest updates from Syria, specifically from the southern city of Sueda, where there were deadly clashes between the Syrian government and Druze minority earlier on in the week. Well, the violence eventually led to Israeli intervention. Well, a ceasefire has now been announced by both the Syrian government and Druze leaders, and that ceasefire appears to be holding. But the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, is accusing Israel of trying to sow divisions in his country. Meanwhile, he is vowing to protect the rights of the Druze community. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
كما أخص في كلمتي هذه أهلنا من الدروز.
I also address the Druze people, who are an integral part of the fabric of this nation. Syria will never be a place for division or fragmentation. We assure you that protecting your rights and freedom is one of our priorities, and we reject any effort that aims to drag you to an external party or to create division within our ranks. We are partners in this land, and we will not allow any group to distort this beautiful image that expresses Syria and its diversity.
Well, after Israel strikes on Damascus and Sueda, the US has described the escalation between Syria and Israel as being a misunderstanding between the two countries. These were the words of the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Here's what he said.
Yeah, it's complicated, obviously. These are historic, long-time rivalries between different groups in the south-west of Syria, Bedouins, the Druze community, and it led to an unfortunate situation and a misunderstanding, it looks like, between the Israeli side and the Syrian side. And we think we're on our way towards a real de-escalation and then hopefully get back on track in helping Syria build a country and arriving at a situation there in the Middle East is far more stable.
Well, let's get more on this, and we can speak now to Dr. Samir Al Taqi, who is a researcher at the Middle East Institute. He joins us from Washington. Dr. Al Taqi, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Arabiya English. Can I just start by asking you for your understanding on the ceasefire? From what you're hearing and what you're seeing, does it appear to be holding?
Thank you very much for inviting me or for making me allowed to participate with you. Actually, till now, things are holding. Still, there are some skirmishes here and there, especially in the eastern area, with the withdrawal of the pro-governmental forces. Maybe they are not regular forces. Actually, there had been some killings and attacks on some civilian in the area. But still, I think it's we can say that the situation is disengaging, and we can say that, yes, things are going toward a better situation at the level of the civilian life. And now people are able to go to see their relatives, to have a look at their homes, etc. So I think things are better, practically.
Okay, and I mean, there is this narrative from Israel that they are trying to defend the Druze people, a minority in Syria. We had a guest on this channel yesterday who said that Israel feels very strongly about defending the Druze. I'm just wondering what you read into that and whether you think there is gratitude on the part of the Druze people for this defense by the Israelis of their cause.
I think if you go to Sueda, which is practically the Syrian capital for the Druzes, actually you will see entering there lots of the monuments indicating the Syrian Druze martyrs who had been killed fighting the Druzes. The current situation now is as such. I think first of all, the Israelis had made an agreement with the current Syrian government regarding the presence of the Syrian forces, especially the heavy armament to be set far away, about 80 kilometers north of Damascus. They are not allowed beyond this line, actually, till the Golan borders. This is one concern. The other concern, I think, for the Israelis is regarding the presence of jihadi Islamist factions that do not necessarily identify themselves as part of the Syrian army, but still they are acting and they are loyal to this current Syrian government. So in this respect, the Israelis are saying that they have concerns regarding those people. And the third factor, of course, is the Druze factor, where there is about 500,000 Druzes, I think. I know 170,000 Druzes in Israel. Some of them are well involved in the Israeli army and the IDF. So I think there are multiple factors that pushed the Israelis for this action. The main factor, I think, is that they feel that the agreement that had been achieved in Azerbaijan, Baku, hadn't been respected regarding the presence of heavy armament in the south, and of course the pressure of the Druzes, which was one of the conditions of the Israelis regarding the ceasefire and beginning a certain process for the withdrawal of their forces. One of the conditions was not to allow the Syrian forces to enter forcibly in Sueda and in the areas of what we call Jabal al-Arab, or the mountain of the Arabs, the main stronghold of the Druzes. So actually, the latest development from the Israeli side is calming down now, but still the situation is very, very, very tense.
Yeah, we've heard from the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, saying that Israel is trying to divide the Syrian people, but nevertheless, he said he was going to proceed with this ceasefire agreement. I mean, do you think there is a risk that Israel's involvement in Syria's affairs and its perceived defense of the Druze risks further deepening sectarian fault lines in the country?
Of course, I think the main task now really facing the Syrian government is to open a real dialogue among the different components of the Syrian society. There had been the fabric of the Syrian society had been totally shattered during the totalitarian regime of the Assad, and the regime was really inciting the confessional and sectarian divide. And I think unless the Syrian government heads toward a serious and not forceful negotiation with the Syrian components, without that, the Syrian situation will continue to be precarious. We have now pressures from Turkey asking the Syrian army to clash with the Kurds in the north. So all surrounding countries do have their share and interest in what's going on. Would it be Israel? Would it be Turkey? Would it be Iraq? And other, or the Russians, of course. So all those forces are maybe waiting for seeing whether the Syrians will be able to forge a kind of national unity among the different components, a kind of a decentralized state that would allow the build up of the mutual confidence among the components. So I think, yes, Israel can harm the task for a political dialogue, but still the main responsibility is for the Syrian government to open a serious, peaceful dialogue with the components that would allow really a real Syrian unity and allow the possibility of a national internal peace. I think this is a condition to block the different kind of interventions from different neighbors or international powers.
Okay, I mean, I'm asking you this next question really for the benefit of international viewers who might not know very much about the Druze. I mean, after all, there's only around 1.1, 1.2 million Druze people in the entire world, most of them in Syria, also in Lebanon, also in Israel. The Druze don't all speak with one voice, do they? And we've heard, for example, the rejection of the ceasefire. That came from one Druze community leader by the name of Hekmat al-Hijiri. He rejected it. But I'm just wondering, who is the one legitimate voice, or is there a legitimate voice that speaks for all the Druze, or at least a majority of the Druze people?
Actually, there is a very powerful intellectual and civil society movement among the Druzes. And those people were fighting peacefully this previous regime. And now they have a real important say in what's going on. And they were those who really opened a dialogue with the Syrian regime, trying to overcome even to overcome the many obstacles that had been raised by the negotiators. But so at the end of the day, the massacres that happened, there had been about 10 small and really bigger massacres. All massacres are equal at the end of the day. But yes, there had been about 10 massacres. And those acts practically united the Druzes together. And they are now willing to go toward a ceasefire. But still, there are some suspicious people who are seeing the presence of the armed forces loyal to the Syrian regime, not necessarily regular forces, still in the area. So, yes, the situation is very precarious. And I think the position now is still, we can understand it in terms of, a synchronized position among the Druzes. Some of them will accept, the others will be suspicious, just to keep their options open rather than a real divide, because at the end of the day, facing those dangers, practically their vision became much more than before. They united much more than before. That's why I think now what we are witnessing is that the Druzes, who are a kind of a religious entity that could be affiliated to Islam, but practically they have their origins in many messages sent by their sheikhs from the Hindu culture, the Buddhist culture, and even the Greek culture. So it's a kind of maybe closer to the Buddhism rather than anything else. Still, they are considered to be Muslims and monotheist. At the end of the day, this could be a detail in this situation, but they are quite a coherent socio-economic entity in Syria, and they have a system of solidarity, social solidarity, and even organizational solidarity, which is quite powerful in spite of their relatively small percentage of the Syrian population.
Yeah, indeed. They're about 3% of the Syrian population. But to go back to what you were saying earlier about some sort of national dialogue between the Syrian leadership and the leaders of other minorities in the country, let's focus obviously on the Druze. Who would you expect to be representing the Druze in such a dialogue? Who are the key figures that you would expect to be sitting across the table from President Ashara or his delegates on this subject of national unity?
I think the Druzes would be able to unify themselves under some kind of, we can imagine a kind of a delegation that could include Mr. Bal'ous and other religious leaders. But the Druzes are, generally speaking, they are very secular, and so they affiliate themselves more to many Sunni secular that are maybe not in harmony with the current Syrian regime. So I think the secular side, which is called the Sahet al-Karama, the place of dignity, which used to be a square in Sueda, where they gathered every week against the previous Syrian regime. I think this coalition of different secular forces among the Druzes is very powerful, and we can imagine them also to have a major role in the mediation, in the negotiations, bridging the gaps. I think this could be quite an important force among the Druzes also.
And it was quite interesting to look at the scenes from Sueda, and particularly when the border fence was penetrated by Druze people on both sides from Golan, which is annexed by Israel, and people on the Syrian side. There were reunions of families that were completely cut off from one another. And I just want to ask you about the Druze who live in Golan, because I gather there's 22,000 permanent Druze residents in Golan, and yet only 1,600 of them have taken up the offer of Israeli citizenship. And I'm just wondering how you think those Druze in Golan, which is controlled by Israel, feel about Israel. Do they feel more Israeli? Do they feel more Druze, or would they sort of feel neither?
It's controversial to a large extent. Actually, the Druzes, as I said, they used to have to play a major and important role in the Syrian army and fought fiercely against the Israeli army. I'm speaking about the Syrian Druzes. So about the Golan Druzes, I think the fact that they have now a peaceful life under Israel, they were not involved in the civil war along more than 14 years, that lasted more than 14 years. And also, maybe they became more and more, let's say, loyal or accepting the Israeli relation. And at the end of the day, I think the main factor here is the factional divide, the confessional divide in Syria that made them feel that when somebody comes to kill you, you do not ask his identity. You just find somebody neighboring you that would be ready to help you. And here, there, especially the Golan Druzes, they have really familial, first-degree familial relations with the Druzes in Sueda, and some of them did have their direct relatives killed in the massacres that happened by the pro-regime forces. They are not maybe regular forces, but they were pro-regime forces. So they see the confessional jihadi propaganda in Syria very much a danger for their relatives. And that's why they were maybe more than 3 months ago ready to intervene and try to defend their relatives. And that's what had happened practically. Still, I think there is another regulating factor. As I said, Sahet al-Karama, the square of dignity. People are trying to calm down and not to allow things to become a kind of pro-Israeli movement among the Druzes. Of course, the scene is very much, like moving sand now in Syria. And because of the atrocities, people could change their camps because of their familial and fear makes lots of change in the Syrian in the people's mind, actually.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there because we're out of time, but really appreciate you speaking to us. Dr. Samir Al Taqi, researcher at the Middle East Institute. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's get a US perspective on these developments, and we can speak now to Greg Swenson, who's the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, who joins us now. Greg, always a pleasure talking to you. Let me just start by asking you about how Washington views what's been happening in Syria. I mean, the rehabilitation of Syria and bringing the leader, President al-Shara, in from the cold seemed to be very much a personal project of President Trump. And I'm wondering, therefore, how you think he views these developments, notably the airstrikes on Damascus.
Yeah, it's a great question, and you're right, Tom. President Trump has got, he's planted some seeds with President Ahmad al-Shara, and I do think he's got great hopes for reintegrating Syria into the West and into the American attempts for peace in the Middle East, and even at some point waving them into the Abraham Accords, which would be quite something. But on the other hand, he does respect the fact that Netanyahu in Israel, has to protect his people, and he's concerned with some of the troop movements on the border, especially around the Golan Heights. So, it's a delicate situation, but I do think, number one, President Trump does not want to upset the process of reintegrating Syria. And that's why Marco Rubio has been all over this. I mean, it hasn't been big news in the U.S. I'm here in Chicago, Tom, but it hasn't really hit the headlines. But I know Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, is very much on top of this and has made some statements and has definitely been involved in the negotiations in the last 24 hours, especially.
Yeah, I mean, he's been extremely busy, as have other parties, trying to mediate and try to, dial down the temperature here. He characterized this as a misunderstanding between Israel and Syria. I mean, is it as simple as that, do you think?
Well, probably not as simple as that, Tom, but I do think that, he appreciates the fact that there are some very long-term rivalries here. There's, these go back, the Druze go back to the, 12th century in Egypt. There's, many of them residing in Syria, Lebanon, Israel, especially in the Golan Heights. I mean, there's a lot of sensitivities here, and you're seeing some armed conflict between the Druze. You've got the Bedouin tribes, you've got the Sunni, I would call them extremists that are loyal to the new government. But then, of course, you've got the Alawites who are probably suffering at the hands of the new government. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And I think that's what the Secretary of State is saying. Let's try to dial it down. They have sort of, they basically got the two sides to agree to a ceasefire, but there's so many other moving parts here.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the Abraham Accords in your first answer, and something we were hearing from the Israeli foreign minister only a couple of days ago, Gideon Saar, saying Israel will welcome Syria to the peace and normalization circle in the Middle East. I mean, they're saying that, and then at the same time, a couple of days later, carrying out airstrikes on the defense ministry in Damascus. I mean, it's really hard to reconcile these two things, isn't it? I mean, the words and the actions seem to be really quite far removed from one another.
It really is, but I don't think this is an attempt to, disrupt the process in Syria. They're not trying to overthrow al-Shara. They're not trying to overthrow the government. This is a specific, isolated incident specifically around protecting the Druze and protecting the border that they're just nervous about, and with good reason. This, going back to October 7th, they've been fighting a multi-front war and have to really be conscious of their borders. So I think this is more of a focused situation for Netanyahu and the IDF. But on the other hand, the real concern, that we all have is that it will escalate and then upset the possibility of Syria, reintegrating into the West. So, there's a lot of sensitivity here. I do think he can balance that. I also think that al-Shara has said that he's going to protect the Druze, and I think it's important that he made that statement. That I think is really helpful. But you can't, whether it's Israel or the Syrian government, they can't control everybody on the ground, and these tribal conflicts are difficult to manage.
Do you think there's a degree of understanding in Washington that, for all the reasons you've mentioned, this is a complex country that's been in a state of internal strife for 12 years. It's home to lots of different groups. 25% of the population of Syria could be put under the heading of minorities, be it Christian, Druze, Alawites. Do you think in Washington there is a sense of we've got to give the new leadership a bit of space and a little bit of leeway to try to fix things in their own way and not to come down too hard on them?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a point and probably, pretty accurate in describing their view. And I think this is part of the new model, the President Trump model, which is not regime change. It's not let's invade the country like we did in Afghanistan and Iraq. Let's let the country figure it out. Once that's settled, which apparently it has been, then we'll support them. We'll try to integrate them in. I don't think President Trump would have chosen, this particular leadership, given that, their background as an Al-Qaeda affiliate. But on the other hand, they needed to sort it out themselves. I think that's the new model of not trying to influence regime change. And I think you could say the same in Iran. Of course, we all want regime change. We wanted it in Syria. We want it in Iran, but we're not willing to go in and execute that because we know that doesn't work. It's a proven failure in terms of strategy. So, yeah, I think the president and the Secretary of State are supporting al-Shura because he's the one who overthrew Assad and in many respects won. And so that's the leadership and that's who we're going to deal with.
Had we been able to sort of look behind the curtain and find out exactly what happened in terms of the mediation efforts by the US, do you think there could have been an element of President Trump saying to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, listen, come back, wind your neck in a little bit and perhaps put a stop to any further thoughts of striking Damascus? It's a fragile country.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's a good point, Tom. I think he did. I would assume he did that, or perhaps Secretary of State Rubio, and I probably did the same with Syria, with al-Shura. So I think, look, the president is interested in peace. He's not starting any wars, that's for sure. When forced to use military execution, he will, like he did with Iran a few weeks ago. And I do think he's done that in the past, but it's targeted, it's isolated, and it's only when he's exhausted all diplomatic means to get something done. So, yeah, I think he's got great hopes for Syria. You saw the engagement that he had with al-Shura in Riyadh on his trip to Saudi. So I think there's great potential here. There are going to be bumps in the road, that's for sure. But the president's strategy worked in his first term. We had peace and prosperity. You saw it with the Abraham Accords. You saw it when he needed to use military strength in isolated situations like with ISIS, like with terminating Soleimani, the skirmish with the Russian mercenaries in Syria. He's not afraid to do that, but it's always going to be diplomacy first and let the people of the region self-determine. And I think, he's showing that again. So he's giving every opportunity to both Israel and to Syria to mend the fences and move on toward a peaceful integration of Syria.
Yeah, President Trump has got a special envoy to the region by the name of Tom Barrack. I don't know if you know Tom Barrack, but he's been talking a lot about a new Middle East, and it's being reported that he and his delegation spoke to the Israeli side and told them to stand down and take a breath. He's obviously looking at a much bigger picture here, which is this new Middle East. There are already some issues in the region. The Trump administration doesn't want any new flashpoints in the Middle East, does it? Because it's obviously, there's only, 3.5 more years of the second Trump administration. He wants to get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely. He wants peace, on one hand, peace through strength, but on the other hand, peace through business. And that's really what the Abraham Accords were about. And I think he sees great opportunity for Syria in terms of doing business with their neighbors and even doing business with the U.S. So that's a good way to prevent armed conflict. There are going to be speed bumps. There are going to be flare-ups. And I think we saw that on Wednesday. But, as I said, Marco Rubio is on the case, And I'm sure those messages were sent by the entire American delegation. You've got a really good team there, many of whom served in the first term, many of whom have experience with the Abraham Accords. So I think there's a great group there.
Yeah, I mean, US intelligence sources saying they can't see any direct involvement between the leadership in Damascus and what happened in Sueda. So that will probably be a source of reassurance for President Trump and his inner circle. I mean, just sort of to wrap up this conversation, I mean, are you confident that the ceasefire that's been brokered will now be, will hold, and that perhaps, the page will be turned on this rather ugly chapter?
Yeah, I mean, confident. I'm not 100% confident because you can never be that way in the region, but hopeful and confident that the U.S. will do everything they can to prevent any escalation. So, yeah, there's a great opportunity here, and I'm glad you pointed out that al-Shara was not involved in these skirmishes. He wasn't instigating them. It's just that there are these tribal conflicts that are sometimes unavoidable. But if he can work with his own people in Syria to dial down those conflicts, just like Israel will do the same, I think there's great possibilities here.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Always a pleasure talking to you. Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas. Thanks a lot.
Great to be here, Tom. Thanks.
Well, despite a ceasefire deal between the Druze minority and the Syrian government, which led to the withdrawal of Syrian forces from the southern city of Sueda, there are reports of Israeli army deployments in the Golan. So why is the IDF redeploying even after the Syrian president Ahmad al-Shara withdrew his troops from the southern city? And how does Israel feel about the US optimism regarding the de-escalation? Well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak now to Ruth Wasserman Lande, who's a former member of the Knesset and an expert on Arab affairs. She joins us from Netani, just north of Tel Aviv. Ruth, thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, a very basic first question for you, but why is Israel feeling the need to defend the Druze community in Syria? What's behind this?
Okay, so thank you for having me, first of all. It's an honor for me. And I would like to dispel some of the conspiracy theories saying that Israel has an interest basically in dividing Syria. That is completely untrue. On the contrary, why anyway, as you ask, do we have an interest in the Druze of Syria? First and foremost, we have a very amazing minority in Israel, a Druze minority, largely in the north of the country, all of them very loyal citizens and civilians of Israel, most of whom serve in the IDF, and some of them have fallen even in the war since October 7. This is like a brotherhood between Jewish Israeli civilians and Druze Israeli civilians, and many of the people in Sueda are in fact family members of those Druze in the north of Israel. So it is expected by our own civilians, our own citizens, that the Israeli IDF would protect their family members from literally slaughter. And what we experienced in October 7th, which is similar to what had happened actually in Sueda. That's number one. Number two, there was a ceasefire agreement between the Israeli authorities and the Syrian authorities, overlooked by the United States, stating and having been promised that there would not be going down by the troops or by Syrian officials southwards to Damascus. In other words, towards the area, in fact, where those Druze are, because Israel sees it as a kind of a buffer zone temporarily because of what had happened, because of security reasons, because of its fear of Daesh or very extreme forces, in fact, coming closer to the Israeli border. And that was simply broken. In other words, there were troops coming in as opposed to what was agreed upon with Israel towards that area. So those are the two main reasons why Israel was even interested in this whole happening. Not to mention the fact that this is an ethical issue. And I'm quite surprised that the entire world was not on its feet when girls and women were raped, massacred, burned, and killed simply for being Druze.
Indeed, and I mean the world is also acutely shocked by developments in Gaza, watching the starvation of 2 million people. And I just want to ask you though about the idea that these are potentially hostile forces, and extremist elements in the Syrian government, because Israel has been giving the message out that perhaps normalization with Syria and normalization with Lebanon is not so very far in the distance. I mean, it seems a bit sort of schizophrenic on the one hand to be viewing them as so hostile they can't go anywhere near, they can't decide where they go in a sovereign country, and on the other hand to be entertaining the idea of normalizing ties with them. I mean, what's going on here?
I would love to answer, but before I answer that, I would like to address the sentence you have made earlier. Because you did make it and you did say that there was a starvation. So first of all, there's absolutely no policy of starvation of anybody. In fact, if you give me one other example of an armed conflict anywhere in the world where the arming party, which was attacked to begin with, is providing energy, water, food, and medicine to the people who attacked it, I would be very happy to hear, because it doesn't exist. In fact, there were very many experiments with the civilian population in order to make sure that despite all the difficulties and the obstacles, they do get the food and the medicine, the water. That's not easy. It's not easily done because Hamas doesn't want Israel to succeed in that. In fact, it wants those civilians, its own civilians, to be hungry and sick and sometimes even die, because it provides them with the right PR in terms of public opinion, which is over horrific. I mean, there's no words to describe how horrific it is. And if they dare take the food that they are given, they are being shot at by Hamas. So hopefully you will not edit this and you will add my comment.
We certainly won't edit this.
You do add your own comment. And
we'll certainly leave that in. Certainly leave that in. But we do speak to humanitarian officials who are on the ground in
Absolutely.
Gaza. But that's a separate debate. But we're told about starvation. We're told that the food is not reaching the people that it should be reaching.
A lot of
Gaza.
the time, the food is indeed not reaching, but not because Israel has any wish to stop. On the contrary, it's putting a huge amount of money, energy, logistics, and the lives of many of our soldiers on the line to make sure that they do get the humanitarian aid. This is insane. There's a whole campaign, a whole company, an American company, Christian company, not even Jewish, that is taking care of that. Our soldiers are guarding that in order to make sure that it happens. So it is a lot of energy to be put into not getting that to the civilians.
Okay, let's get back to normalization of. Let's talk about normalization of ties.
Absolutely.
I mean, is Israel interested in? Yeah, is Israel interested in normalizing ties with this government in Damascus?
Okay, so Israel has very little interest in having another war on another front with yet another enemy. And it is interested in discussing possibilities of ceasefires and a lack of war. The word normalization, or tatbiya, as it's said in Arabic, is not discussed, not because Israel doesn't want it, but because it's not on the table. Tatbiya between the people is not something that the Syrians or the Syrian current government is even interested in discussing. It's only interested in discussing issues pertaining to the security arrangements as overseen by the Americans between Israel and the Syrian government. And that is something that it's not only that Israel is interested, it's being discussed, amongst other things, in Azerbaijan and in other places. So yes, there is an interest, and it's not schizophrenia. It's cautious attempt to understand whether understandings can be made as per security issues between the current government, which was until recently groups of armed designated terrorists, as by the international arena, including many countries in the region, and very hostile to Israel and to Jewish people, not to mention the West. So yes, there is a cautious attempt to try and negotiate or reach some kind of security arrangements.
But this is, I mean, it feels a lot like a personal project of President Trump, that, you know, he really wanted to see a reset with Syria and to give the new leadership a chance. And, you know, doesn't therefore Israel need to tread carefully in this regard, and not to carry out airstrikes on the heart of Damascus?
Well, Israel has no interest in carrying out airstrikes on and in the heart of Damascus at all. But when you ask that question, the circumstances, zuruf, have to be mentioned. And the circumstances, zuruf, they are that people, innocent people, were being gang raped, including children, massacred, burnt, and killed. So again, Israel, having a brotherhood with the Druze population within the country, felt that it could not leave these people alone. No one in the entire universe set out to help them, but Israel did. We experienced exactly the same thing with the same extremist ideology on October 7th. Our people were treated in the same way in the south by Hamas, and we didn't want to leave the Druze alone.
I mean, there are concerns, and, you know, let's be clear about one thing, and I'd love to get your views on this. It doesn't seem that all the Druze are necessarily speaking with the same voice. I mean, do we agree on that? There are different opinions. And one Druze leader by the name of Saif Jarbour says that foreign intervention will not serve the interest of Syria's Druze people. I mean, do you think there is a danger? And I put this question to a guest earlier on. I'd love to get your opinion as well. Is there a danger that Israel's involvement in this and its perceived support of the Druze people will only serve in the longer term to deepen sectarian divisions? What do you say to that?
I would say that when there is a darkness, we need to be a light unto the nations. And there is a humanitarian, really humane interest in not having to have people massacred, raped, and burnt for no reason at all. And yes, there are very few Druze that speak out against this, taking on the rhetoric of the current government in Syria, but they do not represent the vast majority of the Druze. And this is something that is humanitarian, human, and actually dignified responsibility of anybody that respects human rights. And quite contrary to the claims and the rhetoric and the narrative that we are in search of occupying or imperialistic taking of land, it is nowhere near the reality. On the contrary, Israel is a teeny tiny country interested in maintaining the safety of its own citizens, but it will not stand by while the Druze citizens of Syria are being slaughtered, while they are family members of people who give their lives in protection of Israel itself in the northern part of this country, which are the Druze citizens of my country. And I think that is noble.
The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio obviously has been involved in trying to dial down the temperature here, as have other parties, to try to broker the ceasefire deal, which we're being told is holding, although it's extremely fragile, as I think everyone seems to agree. He seems to think this is all some sort of a misunderstanding between Israel and Syria. Is that how you describe it and characterize this, a misunderstanding?
Of course, it's not a misunderstanding, but yes, there is an attempt by other actors, the most important of which is the US actor, to try and bring down the tension and to really try to not have a full-blown war, which is something that certainly the state of Israel is not interested in, despite what, again, propaganda and conspiracy theory holders are saying about Israel. So there is no misunderstanding, but there is an attempt to try and cool down the tensions, as you had so correctly put it. And it is a way of trying to do that, although I think it's an unfortunate word, but largely Secretary Rubio is very positive, trying to do a positive thing. We have a very good and strong friendship and alignment with the United States. But here, again, there is a noble setting out to try and have the people, the Druze people, citizens of Syria, and we respect that there are citizens of Syria. We don't want to take them. We don't want to take their land. We don't want anything of the sort. But that they should not be murdered, raped, and massacred is something that certainly is a noble cause for humanity in general, not only for Israel.
It was also the UN Secretary General. His comments stood out for me. He said he wants to see an immediate cessation of all violations of Syria's sovereignty. I mean, he appears not to be in agreement with what the Israelis have done here.
Who is not in agreement?
The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
Oh, I see. So the UN Secretary General is very well known to have disagreements with Israel. In fact, people like the Iranian regime, the Shiite Iranian regime, and very high-ranking people within it are put as the heads of human rights committees within that same UN. So I'm not sure the standard upheld in the UN is the standard upheld by what normal nations should uphold. Again, in my humble opinion, as a human being and as a mother of 4 children, we are talking about a massacre, rapings of children. They did nothing wrong. They did nothing, absolutely nothing wrong. They were just Druze and not Sunni and not belonging to the same sect as the government in Syria. And it is horrific what had happened there. And with all respect to the Secretary General, he also thinks that we should not have responded to the 7th of October. So I don't know what to tell you. If my children are attacked, God forbid, massacred, murdered, raped, or burnt, I cannot have a tiny doubt, you as a father, I as a mother, that we would certainly see the humanity and the nobleness of coming to the aid of these people.
Just looking forwards and where things head to from here, we have the ceasefire deal between the Druze and the Syrian government, and part of that is a unified committee that's going to monitor the situation in Sweden. So that appears to show that they are now working hand in hand. Does that mean that moving forwards, they don't need any further assistance from Israel, do you think?
So again, Israel is not going to bombard anybody unless there is a very specific threat to the civilians of the state of Israel and or very, very unrationally or inhumanely this kind of massacre that we had seen. So if we will see that there is not an attempt by anybody in Syria to do what they attempted to do to the Druze, of course, there will not be any more bombardments. If we will see that there are no preparations, army, military preparations on the part of the Syrians inside Syria to attack Israel, then no bombardments will be made. If, however, there will be preparations, yes, the IDF will do what is necessary to prevent it, because every government has the responsibility to make sure that their civilians are safe. We didn't do that on October 7th. More than 1,000 people were massacred, murdered, and raped, and carnaged. I believe that we will not do it again.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. We're out of time. But thank you for speaking to us. Ruth Wasserman Lande, former member of the Knesset.
Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you for your time.
Bye-bye.
Well, these latest developments come as Syria stands on the brink of economic recovery. Well, the World Bank recently projected a modest 1% GDP growth for the year 2025. Well, with foreign investment beginning to flow in and debt repayment underway, many Syrians are starting to feel hopeful about rebuilding after 12 years of conflict. But renewed escalation, like Israel's recent strikes and clashes in Sueda, could threaten this fragile process. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Dr. Osama Kadi, a senior advisor to the Syrian Ministry of Economy and Industry. Dr. Kadi, thank you very much for speaking to us once again. We were talking last week, in fact, about growth forecasts for your country and how things are starting to get back on track. Before we come on to that, let me just ask you, first of all, what's the latest you're hearing with regards to the situation on the ground in Syria itself?
Thank you for having me. I think after they reached that ceasefire, it seems that this is a fragile agreement because there's still some issues there in Sueda, but I'm sure sooner or later things will be better because all of our international partners interfered, including the United States and Turkey and Saudi Arabia and many other countries, even the Security Council too. They are actually supporting the new administration, and they are looking forward to having Syria as a stable country. So I think they will trying to strengthen the latest agreement with the government so Sueda can be in a better place economically too.
Sure. And I mean, the countries you mentioned really want to see Syria succeed. And we got a very strong sense of that when President Trump met with President Bashar in Riyadh just a few weeks ago. But what all of Syria's partners also want is for any minorities in Syria to be safe and to live in security. I mean, what pledges is the government making there in Syria?
I think they tried their best with many approaches over the last 6 months. They assigned a mayor there. They met with President Shara many times. They have many agreements to settle that city. And I think most of our people in Sueda with that agreement, but some percentage of them, they are not really happy with that for many reasons. But I think at the end, our people in Sueda, we don't really like to call them minority. They are Syrian people like any other Syrian people. It's really they believe in Syria as their one country, and they would love to live among the 24 million Syrians. And there in Sueda, it's almost like 500,000 to 600,000 only among 23 millions. And they have very great relationship with the rest of the Syrian people. But I'm sure because of some chaos here or there, or some groups who don't really want this place to settle down, this might be a challenge. But I think with a good intention of great people in Sueda and along with the new administration, I think they will reach an agreement, and they will strengthen this agreement because everybody needs to start to solve their own economic problems and social problems. And they live over 50 years of poverty, especially Sueda, by the way.
Sure. And I mean, your role is that of senior advisor to the Ministry of Economy and Industry. And, instability is always, wherever it is in the world, it's sort of a major blockage, isn't it, towards economic development and economic progress. How much of a setback is this, do you think, for the Syrian economy?
If we are talking about like Sueda city, like almost 500 to 600,000 people there, according to latest census in 2000, I think 10. They depend economically very much on agriculture. So 40% of them, they depend on agriculture, the rest on services. But unfortunately, latest situation of agriculture, it's not really in a good place right now, especially after the heavy drought this year, like less than 150 millimeter of rainfall, and most of the land in Sueda and others, but especially in Sueda, depends on the like rain-fed agriculture. So if there is no rain, there will be no crops, then there will be no money. And with this drought this year, even for example, the wheat, that they're supposed to have 200,000 tons of wheat, for example, they have only 2,000 tons of wheat. They have a really very harsh season for them. That actually put more pressure on our people in Sueda too. So that actually, when you have poverty, you have drought, you have no sources of money or to finance any projects, that put a lot of pressure on people, and that will be used. Usually, that will be like a route for any potential conflict. That's why we need this city to really settle down, so we can bring more investment to that city. So it will start really a new phase of economic booming for that city, and trying to really enhance the level of services. And lately, actually, even the previous 14 years during the Syrian regime, their borders being actually dealt with some gangs here or there to have drugs and Kiptagan, and it's really a corridor for that trade, illegal trades. So it's not easy really to enhance their economic level and have really economic growth in that city. So I think from the economic point of view, as an introductory to really settle down and to have a peaceful Syria and peaceful city, I believe we need to have more projects in that city so people really have their jobs. When you have more projects, you create more jobs. So people will really start thinking beyond any like illegal actions here or there. And at the same time, they feel that the government trying to really to support their own people.
Okay, and just in terms of the Syrian economy generally, I mean, how are things progressing? What is the situation there when it comes to the sort of the broader Syrian economy?
No, I think I disagree with the 1% of the World Bank announced of the economic growth for Syria. I disagree totally. Actually, that economic growth needs to be measured quarterly, which is nobody knows, like the first quarter and the second quarter since the previous Syrian regime gone. So there is no real measurement. So that's just an expectation of 1%. It's not really, I think, doesn't reflect the actual growth in Syria. At any rate, I think right now with many projects and MOUs being signed and having all like the borders points being very active. When right now we have DP from Dubai managing Tartus ports, and they will invest $800 million. How come with investing $800 million and we have only economic growth of 1%? Our general budget of 2024 during Syrian regime was only $2 billion. If one company will invest a quarter $billion in Latakia and the other one will invest $800 million in Tartus, that by itself half of the general budget last year. So that's why I disagree with that 1% economic growth. I'm sure it's more. And at the end of the year, everybody will see that the actual really economic growth. For sure, some projects will take a couple months before they start and before they launched. For example, I met one of a big company. I asked them, if we give you the land tomorrow, when you will start producing? He says, the CEO, 8 months. We need 8 months to start producing. So it takes time to really initiate any big companies. Besides, there's more than 6,000 companies, small and mid-sized companies registered the last 6 months only. And 2,000 of them, they are on ground already producing products and services and trying to really contribute a lot to the economic growth. So I think in general, I sense that there's a really positive atmosphere and Syria attracts a lot of investors. And I was in Dubai for that conference, Syrian Recovery, and I met with big company. I can't really announce it right now. They came just to talk about how they can invest in Syria, and they want to produce in Syria, not distribute their products. They want to build their own factories, so we have made in Syria products. And that's what will happen from now till end of the year. We will see a lot of improvement, and day after day, we have a lot of investors who are really interested in coming to Syria. So I'm very optimistic in that sense.
Yep, and I think there's a lot of people in the broader international community who want to see Syria succeed. Thank you very much. We're going to leave it there. Dr. Osama Kadi, Senior Advisor to the Syrian Ministry of Economy and Industry. Thank you for your time. And finally, as is the case every Thursday, we take a look at some of the big stories topping the headlines in the United States. Well, today we're joined by Angie Wong, Miami Executive Committeewoman. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Angie. Always a pleasure talking to you. Let's start by talking about the chairman of the Fed, Jerome Powell. There have been mixed reports this week suggesting that President Trump was considering firing him from the job. Some analysts saying that would have been a mistake. Markets reacting a little bit to this. But it seems that President Trump has decided against this, at least for the time being. What are you hearing?
It would be a grave mistake for President Trump, especially during this time, to touch the Federal Reserve. We have to remember that the Federal Reserve is an independent office outside of the White House. It should be independent, and it should not be pressured by political pressure. So that is something that was really, really clear on President Trump's mind when he was making this decision. Clearly, President Trump wants interest rates to go down so that borrowing power in the United States can go up. Everything from buying cars to student loans to everything would improve the American economy. But Jerome Powell is holding his grounds, and he knows, Jerome Powell, that his 4-year term ends next May of 2026. So he's just going to hang on there. He doesn't have to buckle to political pressure. So that's critical to know that those two, the Federal Reserve as well as the White House, are completely separate. Usually they play very nice together, but not in this case.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a guessing game, hasn't it, all week? Will he, won't he? And President Trump's sort of toying with the idea and keeping us guessing. I mean, I think it's fair to say, isn't it, Angie, that Republicans have got mixed feelings about Jerome Powell. I mean, what are the main voices saying on the two sides?
Sure. Well, President Trump met with several lawmakers yesterday to discuss whether or not they should fire Jerome Powell. And I guess the result today is that President Trump decided not to. Remember, when President Trump announced the tariffs around the world, the bond markets reacted, and his team was watching that very, very carefully. They did not want a part two of that. Now that the bond markets have leveled off a little bit, they don't want to see any sort of upheaval, especially during the time when we discuss what's going on in Ukraine, Russian oil, and additional sanctions, and all the other upheavals around the world. He wants a little bit of stability, especially with the American markets. So I think that was heavily weighed when he was making the decision to keep Jerome Powell in the Federal Reserve. Again, he also understands that, May of next year is going to come up pretty quickly, and I'm sure he has people that he is interviewing for that role. And I'm sure Jerome Powell knows that he will have to sunset next May.
Okay, one of the other stories we've been following, Angie, is of course the situation in Ukraine. And when he first took office, President Trump was pretty hard, I think it's fair to say, on the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. I mean, no one has forgotten and will forget that February encounter in the Oval Office between the two men. But it has to be said, President Trump is sounding a lot more supportive towards Ukraine and increasingly impatient with Moscow. What do you read into this?
No, President Trump has actually said those words, that he's very frustrated with Moscow. He now knows that President Putin only wants to show dominance, and he has no room for diplomacy. And I think President Trump was trying to work a deal, as he does, with the EU, with NATO, with even Canada all this time, and also with China to pressure Putin to coming to the table. Remember, all those past talks, Putin would send very low-level delegates to deal with the Americans and anyone who wants to discuss ending this war, or at least a ceasefire. And now it's kind of accumulated to the point where President Trump no longer thinks that he can get Putin to the table, even with these 50 days. Remember, right after Trump announced that he was going to sell American weaponry to NATO and to the EU and others to supply Ukraine, well, Putin basically responded with a whole night of attacks and drones to Ukraine. So that was his response, saying, I don't care if it's 50 days, I don't care if it's 100 days, we're going to keep going. And I think that was the message that was sent loud and clear. What is brilliant about this deal with NATO is that Trump just a few weeks ago made NATO members increase their defense spending from 2% to 5%, which was almost $1 trillion US dollars. And now that that's in place, he's making them buy U.S. weaponry, U.S. Patriot missiles, and probably things that you and I haven't heard about yet. There's a lot of new technology, especially with our defense contractors, that will be going to Ukraine. Hopefully that scares Putin. But I don't think anything's going to scare Putin at this point. I think he's going to continue to make rounds in Ukraine until American troops are, around the region. And he also understands that Trump will not commit U.S. troops or any additional U.S. money into the region. So I think that's the push-pull that we're seeing right now. Let's see who wins.
Yeah, indeed. And we've spoken to Russian commentators this week who've said that Russia will simply ignore this 50-day deadline and carry on as usual. You mentioned the Patriot missiles there. And, that was something that people were waiting for President Trump to make his position clear about. And I'm just wondering how the announcement about Patriot missiles and this overall sense that yes, the United States is going to carry on supporting Ukraine. I'm wondering how that's going down across the Republican Party, because I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that some in the MAGA support base feel a little bit betrayed by President Trump and his position on this. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's not so much betrayal, more that Americans on both sides of the aisle at this point do not want to send blank checks to Ukraine. We saw an endless war and a lot of American tax dollars going into a region that we don't see benefiting Americans. And, this goes against the America First agenda. But now President Trump has massaged the message so that we are getting paid by NATO members to produce these weaponry to give to Ukraine via NATO and other countries. Now, whether or not that works, I think it works as messaging goes and marketing, but I don't know if my party really sees through this and says, well, we're still giving them weaponry, but hopefully we're going to make some money out of it. So hopefully it's a win-win for both the defense contractors that we like to keep manufacturing here in America, as well as not paying for additional war funding in Ukraine. But ultimately, are we committed to this war? It seems as though President Trump wants to help Zelensky out and provide not just weaponry, but also strategy and also world power, which is exactly what Ukraine needs. But as you just mentioned, Putin, he's not going to sidestep on this. He's not even, I don't think he's even worried, because he constantly is going after more and more territory in Ukraine.
Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene sounding pretty irritated about the idea that this extra weaponry is being sent to Ukraine. So at least some people on the sort of the MAGA sort of support base are not sounding too happy. But there's another issue that's proving to be a little bit divisive within the ranks of the GOP and is sort of haunting President Trump. It just won't go away, will it? The so-called Epstein files. I mean, why won't this story go away?
The story is not going away because it's now become folklore, because there has been no transparency whatsoever. And, before it was just the Democrats doing it. Now Trump's in charge. He is the man to make the decision on whether or not these files come out. Actually, it's the DOJ, and that's also a separate agency, but they work hand in hand. Now, here's the problem. Pam Bondi came out months ago, after she was sworn in as the head of the DOJ, that she had these files sitting on her desk. She went all over American media bragging about these files and how she's going to be releasing them. She even held a press conference with major influencers here in the U.S., inviting them to the White House, giving them these white binders, boasting that here are the files, we're going to go through them and expose everybody. Well, it didn't happen that way, and you can't do a U-turn because, our memories aren't that short. We remember seeing that just a few months ago. So the problem really does lie with Pam Bondi because she went on media. I don't know of any top law enforcer that would go bragging about an active investigation as it was still happening. It doesn't make any sense for her to be talking about it, and now she can't go backwards in her words, which puts President Trump in a bind.
Right, and one of the other things that sort of brought this saga back to public attention was that Twitter, or X, spat between President Trump and Elon Musk on the 5th of June, only, 6 weeks ago. I mean, do you think that was an important spark that sort of helped reignite this whole saga?
It could be, and it also signals to me that perhaps Elon Musk might have seen this list. Now, there was some clarity on the Epstein list by lawyer Alan Dershowitz very recently. He has seen the list because he represented Jeffrey Epstein in Florida. He can't talk about it because a judge has put a muzzle on him and others involved in this case. But what he explains is that there was not really a client list, so to speak. I think client was the word that a lot of people get confused by. What list does exist was an FBI list, and it was more of a guess of who might have been there based on witness testimony versus an actual client list. Again, semantics and words, but that's what people are kind of interchangeably using as a client list. And again, those are sealed by a judge here in the United States, which is why it can't be released. Now, why couldn't Pam Bondi or President Trump say that? Because that, to me, makes a lot of sense, right? If a judge sealed the list, you can't release it, then you can't release it. And again, this is we're not talking constitutionally here, but, that's the judge's orders. But that hasn't really been the messaging here. So the conspiracy continues.
Okay, and just lastly, on a much lighter note, there's been an agreement for Coca-Cola to change its formula. Well, it's one of its ingredients, I should say, really. And President Trump seems to think this is a little bit of a victory. Why is that?
Well, President Trump drinks a numerous Diet Cokes every single day. We know that his vice really is Diet Cokes. He almost always has one in his hand, and that's his fuel. That's how he gets through the day. I'm happy to hear this change, quite honestly, because we know that multiple countries in Europe uses cane sugar. Mexican Coke uses cane sugar, and it tastes great. I've had it before, and it's just a cleaner form. Now, this tells me that the corn producers of America are probably not very happy today hearing this, because this was one of their biggest cash cows. But less GMOs is great. Americans right now consume 500% more pesticides than any other country. So this is great. This is great news for our children growing up. Great news for adults who've had it in their system all this time. But it's time that we go cleaner, because Americans should live longer. We are a very wealthy nation. We should not be dealing with various cancers and other health ailments due to all these, modified genetic crops.
Okay, so a win there for American consumers of Coca-Cola. Thank you very much indeed, Angie Wong. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you, Tom.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for a look back at some of the highlights of the week. Until then, bye-bye.